Good day, guys. Welcome to another episode of my Python tutorial series. My name is Eliaza, and you are watching EA Lego Academy. So, in our last video, we looked at how we can test our code, and I explained to you that there's a module called the unit test module, and we use the test case class to test our code. So, I explained that when you are trying to test your code, you must make sure that if you are creating a function that is executing a program, that function must return a value. So the function should not print out anything because the test case class only works for functions that are returning values. So to take us further in this tutorial series, this episode is going to start from graphical user interfaces. So I will be doing a breakdown of what a graphical user interface is, and we will be writing a few projects, just carrying out a few examples in order to get acquainted and familiar with the concept. When we say graphical user interface, what do we mean? So a graphical user interface is an application or a program that consists of a window screen and widgets on that window screen. So it consists of a window screen, and this window screen has widgets on it. So the widgets can also be called icons as well. So now in Python, there's an inbuilt module that we use to create graphical user interfaces. Now this inbuilt module is called tkinter. Tkinter. So it's pronounced tkinter, but it is spelled TK then INTER. It's an inbuilt module. Of course, we already know what modules are. Modules are Python files that have classes in them or functions. So they are files that have code in them, to make it short. So that's what a module is. So now this Python module called tkinter has some classes that it uses to generate or create widgets or icons, so to say. So we will be looking at a few of them, but before we get started, we want to get down a few definitions. So now we know what the tkinter module is. It's a module that allows us to create graphical user interfaces, specifically desktop applications. So an example of what a GUI is this my PyCharm IDE. So my PyCharm IDE is a graphical user interface. And as you can see, all these things at the top, the main, the play, the debug, they are all icons. When I click on them, something happens. So they enable me to perform operations when they are interacted with. So if I click on these settings, of course, something pops up and I can select from a drop down. So all these things are icons. Now the window screen is the square shape or the rectangular shape you are seeing of my IDE. That is what we mean by a window screen. So it's called a window screen also. Just a minute. It's called a window screen, and it consists of widgets on it. That is that for a graphical user interface. Now, in order to generate a graphical user interface in Python using the tkinter module, we make use of a class called the tk class. Tk, capital letter T and capital letter K. All right, so before I continue defining and explaining, before we start writing code, obviously, because it's a practical course, it's not a theoretical course. So before we proceed any further, I'm assuming that you have opened up your project that you have been using to follow my tutorial all this while. So you open up your project. So mine is variables and data types. I would right click on it, come here to new, and I will just come here and say GUI program. GUI program. So this will just be an introductory class to graphical user interface. Then as we move along, we would engage in much more complex projects. But for now, we will just start and introduce the concept so that we can understand. So the TK class allows us to generate the window screen that we can use to display widgets on. So now, apart from now the TK class is inside the tkinter module. Now that TK class has functions in it. Now the first function is called the title function. This function allows us to create a title at the top of our window screen. So the TK class does exactly what you are seeing here for my PyCharm IDE. It allows me to generate this square that you are seeing. And then the title function in the TK class allows us to generate exactly what you see here. This title you are seeing here, variables and simple data types. So this is the title of this my PyCharm IDE at this point. So that's what it does. And then we have a function inside that same TK class called geometry. Now, this function, it allows us to set the size of our window screen in width and height. So now you can set the default size, but it doesn't mean that it is not still resizable. So you can resize it after setting a default size, just the same way you can resize your PyCharm ID like this, like this. So you can do exactly that using the geometry function. Then we have the main loop. Main loop. So the main loop allows us to make the window screen visible. Now, if you're the kind of person that uses your command line to write code, you would notice that once you write the TK class and you write your title and geometry, and then you start, before you even write the main loop, you are already seeing the window. You will discover that the window will get displayed even before you write the main loop. That's what happens. But when you are using a text editor or an IDE, in order for you to see that window screen displayed, you will need to run the main loop. So we know that the TK class creates the window screen, of course, but in order to make it visible, we need the main loop function. Now the main loop function is also inside the TK class. So without further ado, let's just write something so that we can understand the concept better. So the first thing you want to do is to import tkinter, which is a module inside the Python interpreter. Now I want to create a variable called window. Now this variable will represent my TK class, the window screen that I'm trying to generate. Now you can see my TK class inside the tkinter module. Now after this, I want to give it a title, and I will call it first window screen. So first window screen. Now after this, I also want to give it a geometry. Say window.geometry, and I'll give it a size, so 400 by 600. So now you notice that I wrote numbers within a string. Now this is how the values for your width and your height are recorded in the geometry function. It's just something that Python does. So you have to write it within either double quotes or single quotes. You write a number, then you write a small letter X, and then you write another number. So the first number, 400, represents the width, and the second number, 600, represents the height. Now, having done that, you want to now generate the window screen to display your, you want to call the main loop to generate your window screen. Now, if I should execute this, you will discover that it would generate a window screen for me. So you come here, click on play, and now you can see that I have a window screen generated, an empty window screen. So I have an empty window screen generated. Yeah, so that's how you can generate a window screen. And you can see the title, first window screen at the top, just the same way you have variables and data types. And you can see it's based on the height I specified. I gave it a width of 400 and the height of 600. So that's how you can generate a window screen in Python. Now, since we know how to generate a window screen now, it will be fun if we start adding a few widgets on it or icons, just the same way we have icons on our PyCharm. So you want to create another Python file and call it button. So we want to see how we can add a button widget to our window screen. So what I will do, we know that we know how to generate a window screen to save ourselves the stress. All right, no worry, we'll do everything from scratch. I'm not going to copy anything. So come to new, click on Python file. I'll come here and say button widget. Button widget. Now, you know that the first thing you want to do is to import the tkinter module. That's the first thing. So you come here and say import tkinter. And after that, you want to create a window screen tkinter.tk. Come here and say window is equal to so you say window dot title. So I will give it a title and I will call it button widget, and then you come here and then you give it a geometry, window dot geometry. So I'll make it 500 by 300. Now you want to call your main loop window dot main loop. Now in between the geometry and the window and the main loop rather, this is where you add your widgets to, like a button. We'll look at a whole lot of other widgets, but let's start with button first. So now let's say I want to add a button to this my window screen. So I'll come here and I'll say btn. So you can give it, you create a variable. You create a variable and then you come here and say tkinter. So now the button class or button widget is inside the tkinter module. So you say button. Now because the button is going to be on my window screen, I will need to specify that. I will need to specify that in the parentheses. Say window. Now the button of course will have a text. We'll need some text. So there's an option, there's an inbuilt parameter called text that allows you to assign a value, which will be the text displayed on the button. So I can come here and say button or first button. So first button. Now we have another option called the font option. Now this option does exactly what you think it does, font. It allows you to generate a font, get the type of font, get the size, and specify if it is bold or regular or whatever you want it to be. So just write font, then to generate for you, open a parenthesis. So I will give it Arial. You can use Times New Roman. So Arial, I'll give it a size 30. You can decide to specify bold after you want. Bold. Now you can also decide to give this button a color. So the button has to, now you can apply colors to this button in two ways. The first way is that you can color the background for the button, or you can color the text. This first button you are seeing here, you can color the text. So the way you can give a color to the background of the button is by using another parameter called bg. Now this bg means background. You can write it in full also, background. So I will give it a background of yellow and I will give it a text color of red. So the way you can specify color for text is by using FG, which stands for foreground. Foreground. Come here and write red. Now, the geometry function that we use to give a size to a widget is not the same as a geometry manager. We have what we call geometry managers. Now, geometry managers are what we use in order to make a widget visible on a window screen. Without a geometry manager, a widget cannot be visible on the window screen. Now we have three types of geometry managers. I will still be looking at them in-depthly, but this is just an introductory tutorial introducing the button widget and the label widget. So that's what I want to talk about today, the button and the label widget. So now the first geometry manager we have is the Pack geometry manager. There's no order actually. There's no order in which you list them. You can use any one you want at in any way. There's no particular way you have to list them. So in my own way, I start with Pack, then we have the grid, and then we have the place. So the Pack allows us to stack widgets on top of themselves, one after the other. That is, if you have multiple widgets inside a window screen or on a window screen. And then the grid allows us to arrange widgets in rows and columns. Rows and columns. And then the last one, the place geometry manager, allows us to target the X and Y position of a widget on your window screen before it is placed on that window screen. Now, before we move further, when we look at graphical user interfaces in Python, when we look at a window screen, unlike our normal conventional science subject, whereby if we are trying to create a graph, we have a graph that starts from the left hand side towards the left at the bottom left corner. When we when we come to programming, when we look at graphs, we start at the top left corner, starting from the left. So from the top left corner, extending towards the right hand side for the x axis, positive x, and then for the positive y, we start at that same place from the top left downwards vertically for positive y. So you can see it's a direct contrast to what we know for those of us who are science students. So we have our graph starting from here normally in science subjects, starting at the bottom left and extending towards the right for the positive x, and then extending upwards for the positive y. But when we look at Python programming, specifically graphical user interfaces, we start at the top left corner, extending towards the right hand side for positive x and extending downwards for positive y. So that's for the place. So if I'm to place my widget, if I'm to display my widget on my window screen using the place geometry manager, I know that I will use that knowledge, whereby I know that my origin is at the top left, not bottom left. Now, I'm going to start with the Pack Geometry Manager just to keep things simple and precise. Or rather, I will mix the Pack and the Place Geometry Manager together. So I'm going to show this button like 3 times. The first time I will use the Pack, and then the second and third time I will use the Place. So I'll say btn dot pack. So now this will allow us to just display our button on the window screen. So if I execute this program, you see that I have a button that says first button. And one thing you should know with the Pack Geometry Manager, it puts that widget at the very top of your window screen. So at the top in the middle of your window screen, you have that widget displayed there. So I can decide to pack this button again a second time. I can come here and say btn.pack, and you see that the next one would be directly under the first one. So it stacks them on top of themselves, one after the other. It stacks them on top of themselves. So you cannot repeat a widget actually. That was my mistake. So if I want to create another widget that will be displayed under the first one, this button, I can duplicate it. So I'll just call this one button 1 and come here and say button 1. Then I can copy this button 1 and paste it here. So I'll call it button 2 and pack it button 2. And I'll just change it to second button. So second button. So you will discover that it will stack them on top of themselves, one after the other. So you can see that we have that in a stacked form. So that is how the Pack Geometry Manager works. And mind you, you cannot mix two geometry managers together except they are sharing different parents. Now, when I say parents, I mean the window screen they are placed on. Now you can see that they are placed on this window screen called window. So maybe in a situation whereby I'm using a frame widget, so I will talk about frames later on in this course. So let's say I'm using a frame widget, I can decide to use a different geometry manager on the frame widget, and I can use another geometry manager on my main window screen. So I can display a widget on my window screen like I am doing now, and I can decide to place a widget on the frame widget. So the frame widget, I would explain more on it, but it acts more like your window screen, but it's like your window screen on your main window screen. You understand? It's like a nested window screen. So that's how you can create a button widget. So now let's see how we can create a label widget. So this tutorial covers both buttons and labels. So you just come here, right click on your folder like I did, right click and then come to new, the Python file. Then you can call it label widget. Label widget. And then of course you want to import tkinter like before. We're already familiar with that. Import tkinter, create a window screen, come and say tkinter dot tk, come here, say window dot title. I'll just say label widget, and then give it a geometry manager, say geometry, window dot geometry. I'll give it 400 by 350. You can come down here and run your main loop. See window dot main loop, and then within your main loop, you can come here and say text. I'll just create a variable, call it text, say tkinter dot label. So our label allows us to create a non-clickable text on our window screen. So a text that cannot be clicked. You come here and say window text hello world. So you can decide to give it a font if you want. I'll give it Arial 30. So I will not make it bold this time. It's a foreground. So I'll give it a text color of green, and then a background color of um, orange. You come here and say text dot pack. So you can see that I have a text widget, and it's not clickable. So a label widget that is not clickable. All right, so that was all for the tutorial for today. So it was just a very short tutorial, an introductory um, tutorial introducing you to tkinter and how you can create graphical user interfaces. So if you have enjoyed my video so far, please hit the like button, and if you feel like it would be of importance to someone else, please share. And if you want me to do more content like this in the future, please subscribe. So till next time, have a great day.